Welcome back to Whispers of Wisdom, a channel where great books are not just read, but lived, questioned, and slowly unfolded into meaning. And today, we are stepping into one of the most intense and transformative moments in Thus Spoke Zarathustra by Friedrich Nietzsche. On this channel, we explore timeless philosophy, deep literature, and ideas that challenge how we see ourselves and the world. And in this ongoing series, we are breaking down Thus Spoke Zarathustra chapter by chapter, across 4 major parts, transforming Nietzsche right quote's poetic philosophy into a cinematic, reflective audiobook experience. In this 9th video of our playlist, we are entering the final stretch of the second part, covering chapters 40 to 44, where Zarathustra confronts history, prophecy, redemption, survival, and finally silence itself. These chapters mark a turning point where outward teaching gives way to inward reckoning, where the future is weighed against despair, and where Zarathustra stands alone before his deepest truth. This is not light philosophy. This is the moment where ideas become burdens, where strength is tested, and where silence speaks louder than words. If you've been following this journey, this episode will feel heavier, darker, and more intimate. And if you're new here, consider this your invitation to slow down, listen deeply, and let these ideas work on you long after the video ends. Chapter 40, Great Events. Zarathustra now speaks of great events, and immediately he overturns the common understanding of what greatness means. Because for him, the truly decisive moments in human becoming do not arrive with thunder, crowds, proclamations, or historical spectacle, but unfold quietly, inwardly, and often unnoticed by the many. And it is precisely this misunderstanding that he exposes with ruthless clarity. He observes that humanity has been trained to worship noise, scale, and visibility, mistaking mass movement for meaning and public upheaval for transformation. Yet, Zarathustra insists that the deepest changes occur beneath the surface, in solitude, in silence, in the slow reordering of values within a single soul. He mocks the human hunger for spectacle, noting how people rush toward revolutions, wars, leaders, and crises, believing history is being made only where blood flows and banners rise, while ignoring the subtle shifts of thought, courage, and self-command that quietly reshape the future long before it becomes visible. Zarathustra declares that great events do not announce themselves, because they are born from inner necessity rather than external validation. And by the time the crowd notices them, they have already lost their creative power, hardened into institutions, slogans, or traditions. He sees how the many cling to dramatic moments because they relieve individuals of responsibility, allowing them to feel part of something large without having to transform themselves. And he exposes this as spiritual laziness disguised as historical participation. Zarathustra contrasts this with the Creator, who experiences great events as inner earthquakes, moments where old values collapse, new ones struggle into existence, and the self is irreversibly altered, often without witnesses, applause, or recognition. He insists that such events are frightening precisely because they isolate, because no collective can carry them, and because they demand personal courage rather than shared enthusiasm. Zarathustra speaks of how humanity misreads history, focusing on its visible eruptions while ignoring the slow preparation beneath. The thinkers, artists, and solitary spirits whose quiet labor makes later upheavals possible. And he declares that without these invisible creators, all great public events would be empty storms. He warns that when people obsess over external greatness, they neglect the cultivation of inner strength, leaving themselves vulnerable to manipulation by those who know how to stage spectacle and command attention. Zarathustra does not deny the reality of historical change, but insists that its true source lies not in masses, but in individuals who dare to think differently long before the world is ready. He accuses modern humanity of confusing motion with progress, excitement with depth, and novelty with transformation, chasing constant stimulation while avoiding the slow, difficult work of self-overcoming. Zarathustra urges the listener to mistrust loud movements and to listen instead for quiet shifts within themselves, for it is there that future values are born. He speaks of how the greatest events often feel small at first, appearing as doubts, questions, or subtle dissatisfactions that refuse to go away, and how those who heed them early must endure loneliness, misunderstanding, and ridicule. Zarathustra affirms that the highest form of courage is not joining a cause, but standing alone in one's insight before it becomes fashionable, enduring the long silence before recognition or failure. He declares that history follows creators, not crowds, and that what later appears inevitable was once fragile, uncertain, and dependent on the strength of a few who refused to betray their vision. The chapter closes with Zarathustra calling upon those who would shape the future to turn away from spectacle and inward toward the still, demanding voice of becoming. Because only those who can endure the quiet weight of great inner events are worthy of giving birth to values that will one day reshape the world, long after the noise of the present has faded. Chapter 41, The Soothsayer. Zarathustra now encounters the soothsayer, and with this figure, Nietzsche introduces one of the darkest and most dangerous voices of the human spirit, not because the soothsayer lies, but because he tells a truth in such a way that it drains life of its strength, turning insight into paralysis and foresight into despair. The soothsayer proclaims a vision of the future in which everything is exhausted, where humanity has grown tired of itself, where all striving has ended not in fulfillment, but in weariness, and where the last humans drift through existence without hope, ambition, or creative fire. And this prophecy strikes Zarathustra not as a foolish fantasy, but as a genuine threat, because it speaks to a real temptation within the human soul, the desire to rest forever, to cease striving, to abandon becoming. The soothsayer's words are heavy, slow, and suffocating, carrying the tone of inevitability, as though history itself has already decided that decline is unavoidable, and that all effort toward greatness is merely a delay of the inevitable collapse. Zarathustra recognizes this voice immediately as the most subtle enemy of life, because unlike crude nihilism, which openly destroys, this form of despair seduces through resignation, offering comfort in the idea that nothing more is possible, that striving is foolish, and that peace lies in acceptance of exhaustion. The soothsayer speaks of a future where humanity no longer hungers for stars, where longing itself has been extinguished. And Zarathustra feels the weight of this vision pressing upon him like a nightmare, because it mirrors his deepest fear, that humanity might fail not through catastrophe, but through boredom, complacency, and spiritual fatigue. This is not the destruction of humanity by external forces, but by internal surrender, by the quiet decision to no longer want more than survival and comfort. Zarathustra understands that the soothsayer does not invent this prophecy. He merely gives voice to a tendency already present in modern humanity, a creeping exhaustion disguised as wisdom, a preference for safety over greatness, and a moral philosophy that praises moderation, humility, and contentment as ultimate virtues, while quietly condemning ambition and excess as dangerous. The soothsayer's power lies in his tone of finality, his suggestion that history has reached its endpoint, that all paths have been explored, and that nothing fundamentally new can emerge. And Zarathustra recognizes this as the most deadly lie of all, because it denies the creative power of life itself. As the soothsayer speaks, Zarathustra feels his own strength momentarily shaken, because even the strongest spirit can be tempted by the promise of rest, by the idea that one no longer needs to struggle, risk, or suffer for the sake of becoming. The soothsayer offers not annihilation, but sleep, a gentle sinking into meaninglessness that feels merciful compared to the pain of striving. Zarathustra sees that this voice gains its authority not from falsehood, but from half-truths. It correctly observes humanity's weariness, its moral stagnation, its fear of greatness, but then draws the fatal conclusion that this condition is permanent and unavoidable. Zarathustra understands that the true danger is not suffering, chaos, or conflict, but the loss of desire itself, the extinguishing of the will to overcome. Because where there is no will, there can be no future. He reflects that many who hear the soothsayer will feel relieved rather than frightened, because the prophecy absolves them of responsibility, telling them that their smallness is not a failure, but a destiny. In this way, the soothsayer becomes the priest of nihilism, sanctifying decline and turning weakness into fate. Zarathustra resists this vision with everything within him, not by denying suffering or exhaustion, but by affirming that life's essence is not comfort or completion, but continual overcoming, and that even exhaustion itself can become a force for transformation if it is met with courage rather than resignation. He recognizes that the soothsayer's vision will return again and again, especially in times of peace, abundance, and stability, when humanity begins to mistake comfort for fulfillment and forgets the joy of striving toward something higher than itself. Zarathustra vows inwardly that he must prepare himself and others for this temptation, because it will not arrive as an enemy with weapons, but as a weary voice whispering that nothing is worth the effort anymore. The chapter closes with Zarathustra carrying the burden of this prophecy within him, not as a truth to be accepted, but as a challenge to be overcome, understanding that the future depends on whether humanity listens to the soothsayer's lullaby of resignation or to the harsher, more demanding call of becoming that refuses to let the will fall asleep, even when it is tired, wounded, and alone. Chapter 42, Redemption. Zarathustra now speaks of redemption, and immediately he strips the word of its traditional religious meaning, tearing it away from ideas of sin, forgiveness, and salvation by an external power. Because for him, redemption is not something granted from above, but something wrested from existence itself through strength, understanding, and creative will. He confronts the deepest wound of human consciousness, the past, that which has been and cannot be undone, the irrevocable chain of causes, actions, mistakes, and sufferings that weigh upon the soul like an unmovable stone. Zarathustra recognizes that humanity's hatred of life does not arise primarily from pain, but from resentment toward time, toward the irreversible nature of becoming, toward the fact that one must say, "It was," to moments one wishes to erase. This resentment gives birth to morality, religion, and metaphysics that condemn the world, inventing realms beyond time where justice can be restored and wrongs corrected. And Zarathustra sees these as attempts to escape the terror of temporality rather than face it. He declares that humanity has poisoned life by judging existence from the standpoint of regret, measuring the present against an imagined purity or perfection that never existed, and in doing so has turned memory into a source of guilt rather than wisdom. Zarathustra identifies the will's deepest torment as its inability to will backward, its rage at the past's immovability, and he understands that as long as the will remains trapped in this antagonism toward time, it will remain weak, vengeful, and life-denying. Redemption, then, does not mean erasing the past, forgiving it, or compensating for it in some imagined afterlife, but transforming one's relationship to it so completely that even suffering, failure, and error are affirmed as necessary moments in one's becoming. Zarathustra proclaims that true redemption lies in teaching the will to say, "Thus I willed it," not as a lie, but as an act of supreme strength, where one embraces one's entire history as if one had chosen it, not because it was pleasant, but because it was formative, This is the birth of a new freedom, one that does not depend on innocence or moral purity, but on the capacity to integrate all that has been into a coherent affirmation of life. Zarathustra understands that this task is terrifying because it demands the abandonment of victimhood, the relinquishing of excuses, and the refusal to blame fate, gods, or others for one's condition. To redeem the past is to assume full authorship of oneself, even where one was weak, ignorant, or broken. He exposes how traditional redemption doctrines deepen resentment by framing suffering as punishment or test, thereby keeping the soul dependent on judgment and reward, whereas his redemption dissolves judgment entirely, replacing it with creative necessity. Zarathustra insists that the will must learn to love necessity, to see even its chains as conditions of its power. And this love is not sentimental, but forged through discipline, insight, and repeated confrontation with one's own history. He speaks of the spirit of revenge as the great enemy of redemption, because revenge is the will's rebellion against time, its futile attempt to punish what cannot be changed. And he declares that as long as revenge rules, humanity will remain trapped in cycles of moralism, guilt, and condemnation. Zarathustra offers instead a vision of the will that becomes reconciled with becoming, that sees the past not as a verdict, but as raw material for creation, and in doing so liberates itself from the need for metaphysical consolation. He hints here at the doctrine that will later be fully revealed, the idea that one must be capable of willing the eternal return of all things, not as a hypothesis, but as a test of strength, because only a will that can affirm its entire existence without remainder is truly redeemed. Zarathustra understands that such redemption is rare and demanding, accessible only to those willing to endure the weight of existence without fleeing into illusions of transcendence. But he insists that without it, humanity will remain at war with itself, divided between longing and resentment. The chapter closes with Zarathustra standing as a teacher of a terrifying freedom, offering not comfort, but transformation, not forgiveness, but affirmation, calling upon those who would be whole to cease cursing time and instead become strong enough to bless it, to turn even the darkest moments of their past into foundations for future creation, and to redeem existence itself by learning to say yes to life in its entirety, without remainder, without appeal, and without regret. Chapter 43, Manly Prudence. Zarathustra now turns to manly prudence, and with this shift, he descends from the lofty heights of metaphysical struggle into the sharp, dangerous terrain of lived reality, where strength must not only be conceived, but preserved, defended, and wisely deployed amid hostility, misunderstanding, and envy. He speaks here not to the dreamers or the naive, but to those who have chosen the path of self-overcoming and must now learn how to survive among those who resent strength precisely because it exposes their weakness. Zarathustra understands that the Creator does not live in a vacuum, he walks among others who may smile, praise, or even imitate, yet inwardly wish to see him stumble, weaken, or fail. Manly prudence is therefore not cowardice, nor is it deception for selfish gain, but the disciplined intelligence that knows when to reveal and when to conceal, when to advance and when to withdraw, and how to protect one's inner fire from those who would extinguish it out of fear or envy. Zarathustra warns against the childish belief that truth must always be spoken openly, because indiscriminate honesty can become a form of self-betrayal when it places one's deepest insights into the hands of those who cannot understand them and will only distort or weaponize them. He insists that strength without prudence becomes recklessness, and that many noble spirits have been destroyed not by enemies, but by their own inability to guard themselves against the small, slow poisons of ridicule, resentment, and moral condemnation. Zarathustra speaks of how the world punishes those who rise above it, not always through violence, but through mockery, isolation, and the quiet withdrawal of recognition. And he teaches that the strong must learn to endure this without becoming bitter or vengeful. Manly prudence means knowing that not every battle is worth fighting, that some victories cost more than they give, and that survival itself can be an act of courage when one's task is still unfinished. Zarathustra rejects the moral ideal that equates goodness with transparency and harmlessness, arguing instead that life itself is selective, strategic, and often silent in its greatest processes, and that the Creator must mirror this wisdom if he is to endure. He encourages the listener to cultivate a surface that can endure misunderstanding, even hostility, without allowing it to penetrate the deeper layers of becoming. Because the greatest danger to the Creator is not opposition, but internal corrosion caused by taking the judgments of the many too seriously. Zarathustra emphasizes that prudence does not mean shrinking oneself to fit the world, but choosing the right moments to assert one's strength, like a blade that remains sheathed until its strike will matter. He warns against the temptation to prove oneself constantly, because the need for validation is itself a form of weakness that leaves one exposed to manipulation and exhaustion. Zarathustra also acknowledges the loneliness of prudence, because it demands restraint where passion longs for expression, and silence where pride seeks recognition. Yet he insists that this loneliness is preferable to the destruction of one's highest potential. He teaches that the Creator must learn the art of distance, not only from enemies, but also from admirers, because admiration can be just as dangerous as hatred when it seeks to fix, idolize, or domesticate what is still in motion. Zarathustra speaks of how many who claim to love the strong do so only on the condition that strength remains harmless, predictable, and useful to them, and he urges vigilance against such subtle chains. Manly prudence, then, becomes the wisdom of self-preservation in service of creation, the capacity to endure misunderstanding without seeking revenge, to remain silent without becoming cowardly, and to act decisively without craving applause. The chapter closes with Zarathustra affirming that the highest strength is not loud, not reckless, and not eager for recognition, but calm, guarded, and patient, knowing that its time will come, and that to protect one's becoming is not selfishness, but responsibility, because the future depends on those strong enough to survive the present without surrendering their vision. Chapter 44, The Stillest Hour. Zarathustra now enters the stillest hour, and this chapter unfolds not with action or proclamation, but with an almost unbearable inner silence, because this is the moment where the deepest truth can no longer be postponed, disguised, or softened, and where Zarathustra must finally confront himself without distraction, audience, or escape. The stillest hour arrives like a weight pressing upon his soul, a time when even courage grows quiet, and the voice within speaks with terrifying clarity, stripping away all excuses, delays, and justifications. Zarathustra feels accused not by others, but by his own highest potential, by the unspoken demand that has followed him since the beginning of his teaching. And he realizes that silence itself has become a judge, revealing what words and movement have concealed. In this stillness, he hears the voice that tells him he has not yet spoken his deepest thought, that he has circled around it, prepared for it, hinted at it, but has not yet dared to give it fully to the world. And this realization strikes him with a fear greater than any external danger. Zarathustra understands that this is not a failure of knowledge, but of courage, because to speak the deepest truth means risking total misunderstanding, rejection, and isolation, not merely from the many, but even from those who have followed him thus far. The stillest hour reveals that all previous struggles, all warnings, all teachings have been preparations for a single, decisive act of affirmation that he has postponed out of prudence, weariness, and perhaps even compassion. He feels the weight of responsibility pressing down upon him, because to withhold this truth is to betray not only himself, but the future he claims to serve. Yet to speak it is to expose himself completely, stripping away the protective distance he has maintained between his inner vision and the world. Zarathustra recognizes that silence itself can become a form of cowardice when it shelters fear rather than wisdom, and that even prudence, once necessary, can harden into avoidance if clung to too long. The stillest hour does not accuse him with anger, but with inevitability, reminding him that the path he has chosen demands completion, not endless preparation. He feels how time itself seems to pause, how the noise of the world recedes, leaving him alone with the truth that becoming cannot be delayed indefinitely without turning against itself. Zarathustra experiences this moment as both crushing and clarifying, because it reveals that his suffering has not been accidental, but a necessary forging of strength required to bear what he must now affirm. He understands that the deepest truth is not a doctrine to be debated, but a burden to be carried, one that will change not only those who hear it, but the one who speaks it, perhaps irreversibly. The stillest hour exposes the paradox of his task, that the greatest gift he can offer humanity may appear to many as the most terrifying, because it demands more strength, responsibility, and affirmation than most are willing to endure. Zarathustra senses that once spoken, this truth cannot be taken back, cannot be softened, and cannot be hidden behind metaphor forever, and that from this moment onward, his solitude will deepen, because he will no longer be able to retreat into partial revelation. The silence presses upon him until it becomes unbearable, until he realizes that not speaking would be a greater betrayal than being rejected, because it would mean choosing comfort over destiny. The stillest hour teaches that true courage is not loud defiance or heroic action, but the willingness to stand alone with one's deepest insight and release it into the world without guarantee of acceptance or understanding. As the chapter closes, Zarathustra emerges from this silence changed, carrying within him the certainty that the next phase of his teaching will demand everything from him, because the stillest hour has revealed that his greatest trial is not opposition from others, but the demand to be fully faithful to his own becoming, regardless of the cost. And with this realization, the second part ends, not with resolution, but with a trembling readiness for what must come next. In this episode, we walked through the closing chapters of the second part of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, exploring what Nietzsche calls great events that unfold quietly, the haunting voice of the soothsayer and humanity's temptation toward exhaustion, the radical idea of redemption as the power to affirm one's entire past, the necessity of manly prudence in a hostile world, and finally, the stillest hour, where Zarathustra confronts the truth he has not yet dared to speak. These chapters are not about answers. They are about pressure, silence, responsibility, and the terrifying weight of becoming fully oneself. If you followed the earlier videos in this playlist, you can feel how the journey has deepened, how the voice has grown more inward, and how the stakes are no longer abstract ideas, but the courage to speak one's deepest truth. If this video resonated with you, make sure to explore the previous episodes on this channel, where we unpack earlier chapters of Zarathustra step by step, and stay with whispers of wisdom, because in the next part, we move into the third part, where Nietzsche's vision grows even darker, more symbolic, and more demanding. This is where the wanderer walks alone, where questions of eternity, suffering, and affirmation reach their highest tension. Stay tuned, stay thoughtful, and stay curious,